that was Simon Ray that you just heard in the background. You also heard the voice of Lana Kirkham, and you heard Jip Begain, and also you heard Jack Doyle, proprietor of Sound Records. And I love that while you were listening to that, Ed, you reached down beside you and just pulled up some vinyl, because even though, as we established earlier, we don't have decks in the studio anymore, I love that you brought it in, because there is something so beautiful about the artwork, about the vinyl themselves. Now I've got beautiful colours on there, different sort of formats, different textures on there. They are tactile, aren't they, records? Tell us what you've brought in.
Well, I just thought I'd pick out two examples here because, hang on. Let's just have a look at that Neil Young one first off, that gatefold. So this was new this year. Tonight's the Night live at the Roxy, when the Roxy Club opened in New York. Neil Young and his band at the time, which featured the likes of Ben Keith and Niels Lofgren in it, and a couple of the guys from Crazy Horse. Gatefold, which is just a beautiful record there.
That is an absolutely gorgeous and beautiful photo on there. And then, you open it and there they are. There's boots hanging from various instruments on the stage. That's fascinating in itself. I'm wondering what's going on there, but that's beautiful. And one of the things that we talk about in the much longer interviews from that Vinyl Virtues programme, we talk about artwork and how that is just something so important, especially gatefolds like that. That's
very
beautiful.
Much so. Well, I was going to say, I mean, these are two labels that I absolutely love, particularly for their design and their aesthetic. So this is the Bonicons of Doom album, which was their debut album, which came out this year on Rocket Recordings. And Rocket have been going for about 20 years now, I think, a UK-based label. But I love their design, their aesthetic. It's
shiny.
It's just got... There's a theme, that goes through a lot of their artwork. You can often tell when it's a Rocket artist, just like you used to be able to tell when it was a Factory Records release, that sort of thing. Acid splatter vinyl, so yellow vinyl with black sort of covers marbled right the way through it.
Stunning.
Die cut sleeve as well, with this big metal disc, like smiley face disc on the front with the eye slits cut out of it. And then this label as well, El Paraiso, which is based in Copenhagen in Denmark. This band, Mythic Sunship, we've got one of their albums from this year, which was one of my favourites, Another Shape of Psychedelic Music. But again, just the way it looks, there's a theme that runs through a lot of their artwork. They always use really nice cardboard, like recycled cardboard as well, but the design...
I have to say that does feel just wonderful. It's really smooth, it's just gorgeous, and lovely design. And
I collect a lot of the El Paraiso releases for the artwork as much as the music. I think you can often do that as well. If you are a collector, you'll find an artist or a label that you particularly love, and then it becomes very, very tempting to get a lot of their releases.
Well, I have to say, even when it comes to CDs, because of course CDs still have fabulous artwork on them. And when I used to do a couple of different shows, again on different radio stations, but I would go in to HMV. HMV now potentially on the way out as well. But I would go in there and I would make a point every week of buying 2 or 3 albums for the artwork.
Yeah.
Not because I knew anything about the band, but just to see what it sounded like. And I remember, for instance, I Am Clute Natural History. I bought that because of the artwork. I'd never heard of the group before. And then, of course, that was their debut album, and they went on to do fairly decent things, and, they're still around now. And little things like that I really remember. But there's something about vinyl, just something about it. And again, it's something that we talk about in the Vinyl Virtues full programme, which you're going to hear at some point, but you will hear some clips from it a little bit later on in the show. So vinyl still very much alive, Ed.
Yeah, well, I think it just covers all bases now as well, doesn't it? So you've for your tactile experience, for your listening at home, for the when you want it to be a bit of almost like a little ritual, a listening experience.
Exactly.
You put your records on your turntable. For convenience and transportability, you've got your downloads or your streaming. So you get downloaded versions of the albums in most vinyl these days. A link, but then there are the streaming services as well, and I just think the streaming services, I know that there are issues with the royalties and whatnot, but if you're listening to stuff and then going out and buying the records as well, and particularly if you're buying them from independent stores or directly from the artist, which you can do a lot these days as well, particularly through Bandcamp, which is a wonderful resource, then do that. Support artists as directly as you possibly can. And use the streaming services when they suit you as well.
Yeah, because the point is, if you want these artists that you enjoy to continue making music, you must pay for what they create, because otherwise they won't have the money to be able to make the music again for you. So you're potentially going to lose them if you don't support them.
So many of these artists that we listen to these days, technically, they're not professional musicians. Yeah. They have day jobs, a lot of them, or they run their own studios. That's another good income source for a lot of them. So like we were talking about White Denim in the first that Radio Milk studio that they have in Austin now, they'll run that as a commercial operation as well. You know,
which
to
will then
make money.
fund their own endeavours.
Exactly, and then obviously record themselves there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's to fund their own endeavours.
I have to say, it always reminds me of a story. I love that there's a particular group called Sweet Billy Pilgrim, who I absolutely love. And Tim, I think Eisenberg, I think his name is, who's the singer from the group. They were actually one of the Mercury Award nominees for about sort of 5 years ago. And I was so shocked that they made it into this list, because they're very, very small group, but their album was wonderful. And I remember Tim being interviewed on I think it was Chris Evans he was speaking to, so he was on radio too. And Chris had said after the chat with him, he said, "Oh, can you stick around for a bit longer, Tim?" And Tim went quite quiet, and then he said, "Well, I'm really sorry, Chris, but I actually can't, because I'm a plumber and I've got to go to a job." And that says it all. Here he is on one of the most important awards lists in music, and yet he had to go and do this plumbing job to pay the bills, which is just says it all, doesn't it, really?